Hey everyone, welcome back. Today's video is going to be a little different. If you've been following me for a while, you might remember a video I made before about online relationships, meeting people through dating sites, and how some of those stories lead to marriage, sometimes with unexpected results. That video got quite a lot of attention, but I didn't go too deep into the details back then. This time, we're going to look at something that's happening right here in Indonesia, something that not many people have talked about before. We're talking about contract marriages, or, as they're called here, Kawin Kontrak. It literally means marriage by contract. So, what exactly does that mean? Well, imagine two people who agree to get married, but only for a specific period of time, a week, a month, maybe just for the length of someone's vacation. And when that period ends, so does the marriage. No divorce, no paperwork, just the end of an agreement. If that sounds strange, you're not alone. It's a practice that has existed in other parts of the world too. For example, in Iran, there's something called muta marriage, where couples can marry temporarily for an agreed period. But here's where things get complicated. Indonesia isn't a Shiite country, and this kind of marriage doesn't exist in its traditional Islamic or cultural system. So, how did contract marriage even appear here? To understand that, we have to go back a few decades, to the early 1980s, in a place called Cianjur, right near the Puncak region, between Jakarta and Bandung. Back then, this area started to attract visitors from the Middle East, mostly men who came for tourism, short vacations, or business trips. And over time, some of them began forming relationships with local women. But instead of traditional marriage, some of these relationships took the form of temporary arrangements, often negotiated through intermediaries or local matchmakers. These agreements would say things like, married for 1 month, no strings attached, no legal registration. From outside, it looked like marriage, but legally, it wasn't. And that's how Kawin Kontrak began spreading, starting quietly in the 1980s and eventually becoming a known but controversial practice in certain areas of Indonesia. Over time, what started as a quiet local practice in Puncak began to attract more attention, not only from the local community but also from the media and authorities. These so-called contract marriages weren't officially recognized by Indonesian law, but they still happened, often with the help of local brokers or intermediaries. Here's how it usually works. A foreign visitor, most commonly from the Middle East, arrives in Indonesia, sometimes for a short vacation, sometimes for business. Through a local contact, he is introduced to someone who can arrange a temporary marriage. The matchmaker finds a local woman, often from a nearby village, and the two sides agree on the terms, the length of time, a dowry or payment, and a few basic conditions. Then they go through a simple ceremony, witnessed and lit Nikah by a local religious figure, but never registered legally with the government. And just like that, they're married. When the agreed time ends, the marriage ends too. No divorce, no records, no lasting obligation. For some local women, this might seem like a chance to earn money, to help their families, to cover daily needs. But for many others, it brings deep emotional and social consequences. Because once the man leaves, they're left behind. Sometimes there's a child involved. Sometimes there's heartbreak. And sometimes there's stigma from the community. The Indonesian government and religious authorities have repeatedly stated that Kawin Kontrak is not legal, nor is it recognized under Islamic or civil law. Yet, in some tourist regions, the practice continues, often quietly, behind the scenes, driven by economic inequality and cultural misunderstandings. For outsiders, it might look like a simple agreement between two adults, but in reality, it's a lot more complicated, involving poverty, gender roles, and sometimes even exploitation. When I first heard about Kawin Kontrak, I thought it was mostly a rumor, one of those stories that travel fast online. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized it's real. It doesn't happen everywhere, but in some regions, like Contrak, people openly talk about it. Some even treat it as a local industry. There are brokers, drivers, and even small hotels that know exactly what's going on. The sad part is, many of the women involved are young, sometimes divorced, sometimes single mothers, and often struggling financially. For them, this isn't about romance or love, it's about survival. On the other hand, many of the men who come for these arrangements don't see it as exploitation. They see it as a religious or cultural loophole that allows them to have relations while abroad. But when they leave, the consequences stay behind. For the women, the children, and the communities involved, I came across stories of women who were left with babies and no legal proof of marriage, meaning their children couldn't even get proper birth certificates. In a conservative society, that leads to lifelong stigma. Some local imams and community leaders have tried to stop this practice, saying it goes against Islamic values. That marriage is supposed to be sacred, not temporary or transactional. But in places where poverty runs deep, it's hard to find something that people see as a source of income. There's also the issue of tourism. Many locals depend on visitors for their livelihoods, and that creates a moral gray area where what's wrong becomes quietly tolerated because it brings in money. The government has occasionally stepped in, raiding guest houses or warning foreigners, but most of these cases never make it to court because there's no official record, no paperwork, no evidence of marriage or wrongdoing. It's like a shadow system existing between culture, religion, and survival. When you look at it from the outside, Kawin Kontrak might sound like a strange or even shocking concept. But when you talk to people who live in these regions, you start to see that it's not just about morality, but it's about survival, inequality, and cultural misunderstanding. Many of the women involved don't see themselves as victims. They see it as a practical choice in a difficult situation. And yet, When the husband leaves and life returns to normal, that sense of emptiness often follows. Some find themselves isolated, judged by others, unable to remarry easily because of their past. Others try to move on and rebuild their lives. The truth is, behind every temporary marriage, there's a real person with feelings, hopes, and pain. And for the foreigners who take part in these arrangements, many might not even realize the long-term damage it can cause. What feels like a short-term experience for them can leave lasting emotional and social scars for someone else. I'm not here to judge anyone, but I think we all need to look at these stories with a bit more empathy and understanding. Because when love, culture, and economics mix in this way, things are never as simple as they seem. So, next time you hear about contract marriages or see headlines about Kawin Kontrak, try to look beyond the surface. Ask what really drives people to make these choices. And remember that in the end, these are human stories, not just headlines or gossip. Thanks for watching. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content about real-life stories across Indonesia and Southeast Asia. See you in the next one.